Hi everybody, it's Cory, back again with you. Sorry about a little bit of a gap. Do try to get these videos out as frequently as I can. Sometimes there are gaps just due to, life happening at me instead of with me. So I hope you'll forgive me when that sort of thing happens. Today I'm here with you. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about harvest festivals because we're in kind of that harvest festival season right now. We've just passed the autumnal equinox, which a lot of people kind of in the sort of neo-pagan community celebrate as Mabon or Mabon, or however you or they or anyone chooses to pronounce it. There's definitely some roots to that that you could get into, but in general, it's just kind of become a pagan wheel of the year holiday that sort of looks to this period of the equalization of light and dark. You have kind of a lot of agricultural imagery that gets woven into it as well. So there's some interesting stuff that kind of happens with that. But it's one of the ones that's really well known, particularly for people who are kind of in a magical spirituality. A lot of people kind of know that these festivals, that festival exists, right? So they are aware of this kind of autumnal equinox festival. But I know for a lot of people that doesn't really resonate. For a lot of people, the area that you are in, for example, may not really feel like it's shifted into kind of full-on harvest mode, quote unquote, so to speak, at this point of year. And there may be people who don't even celebrate this because you're just not part of an active agricultural cycle or system wherever you are. We're all part of agriculture, of course, no matter where we are. But at a certain level, you may exist in a space where that doesn't really mean a lot to you, right? You're not surrounded by farmland. You're not necessarily growing food, at least not food for your long-term sustenance. You may have plants and things like that are part of your practice, but overall, like this holiday may not mean a whole lot to you. And if it doesn't, that's totally fine. There's no reason that you have to celebrate every single holiday on that wheel. The wheel itself is actually a fairly new creation. There are aspects of it that predate Christianity. Of course, we know that there were some seasonal festivals held in ancient times by a few different groups. But really, when we're talking about the kind of the wheel of the year as it's understood now, it's really a development of some things that happened in the 20th century more than anything else. You had some influences from, for example, James George Fraser, I'll just call him Fraser, author of The Golden Bough, who's this 19th century anthropologist who's very much kind of an armchair anthropologist, didn't go into a lot of field work, but collected a lot of information from books and other people's accounts and kind of put them together in something called The Golden Bough, which looked at magic and magical spirituality. And in doing that, he kind of said, hey, there are these fire festivals that I see repeated in some of these cultures, and that seems to be kind of a calendrical thing, a thing we see sort of on the calendar cycle. And so from Fraser's version of that, we also, you get the poet Robert Graves in the 20th century, who kind of looks at this, and he's also a little bit of an armchair anthropologist, but he's looking at it through sort of what he calls the mythopoetic lens, saying like, is there something we can draw from this as sort of a comparative spiritual studies, and also sort of looking at sort of inspiration in poetry and things like that. And between the two of them, and you get Margaret Murray's some theses in the early 20th century about pre-Christian magical cults and things like that. And a lot of this material, we wouldn't say that it's still supported by scholarship now. It's not still necessarily something we would point to and say, yes, those are absolutely facts and those are absolutely historical truths or anything like that. But we can look at them and say, oh, they're very influential and they're very important in shaping kind of opinions and perspectives on a lot of this sort of research that was going on, and a lot of the people who would go on to be very, very important in sort of the creation of what we think of as sort of neo-paganism and Wicca more broadly. So the most obvious example of this is Gerald Gardner, who very much kind of adopted stuff out of Fraser and Graves and Murray, and turned that into really a fourfold calendrical cycle. It wasn't until the 50s or so that expanded and became more of a 6 or an 8-fold calendar cycle. And even the name Mabon, Gardner is not really directly responsible for including that. I think it was Aidan Kelly who kind of popularized that term. sometime in maybe the 60s or the 70s. So and that really caught on through the fact that there was this kind of burgeoning underground magazine publication thing going on, where you had things like the Green Egg that people were writing into and sharing their sort of experiences with these neo-pagan religions. And so because of that, this takes off. You get this idea of this eightfold calendar. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of it. There's nothing wrong with doing all that. But it can and has, I think, since sort of the advent of all this in the 50s and 60s, it has sort of taken over this sort of headspace for a lot of people that there's this eightfold wheel of the year, and you follow that specific cycle, and that's really what you observe, right? And nobody's being dogmatic and saying like, well, if you don't celebrate Mabon, then you're out of the game. You know, it's not like a red card in soccer or something like that, right? But there really is kind of the sense of like, oh, there's these 8 holidays, and that's the wheel of the year, and everybody's trying to kind of connect their holidays to that wheel of the year. But one thing that I've really enjoyed over the past 10 years or so is seeing a lot more people talking about some of the folk festivals and folk traditions that are associated with holidays that don't exactly line up with that wheel of the year, or that represent kind of an entirely different tangent in terms of the festival season around that time. Because human beings have always done festivals. We've always done ways of sort of breaking up the mundane experience of the world, the way that we experience everyday time, particularly time that's associated with work and labor, which we've had to do for thousands of years at this point. We've found ways to break that up so that we can have some time that is not devoted to that, and in fact kind of sits outside of the everyday experience of time. So in ancient Rome, there were festivals. On average, about every 10 days, there would be some kind of a festival that sort of broke up your time. And in other eras and other places, these festivals sort of have arisen as a way to set aside some time for pleasant, recreation. Sometimes there's this element of what we would call misrule, where typical social norms are suddenly inverted. That happens a lot with things like Saturnalia. As we get closer to the winter holidays, I'll probably get into that. The whole point of this festivity is to do this way of taking the daily cycle, putting a pause button on it, and saying, all right, so now we're entering into a time period where things are not as they normally are. And they're special because of that. They're sanctified. They're magical in some way. They have certain qualities or sort of bonus features, right? Like these are sort of perks that get added to these portions of the calendar. And Mabon is just one of many possibilities that you could be, working with. So, for example, there are a number of festivals associated with this kind of period from around the equinox all the way up to what we would sort of think of as All Hallows or Samhain, or the sort of, beginning of November period, when we start to really shift into winter mode as opposed to sort of that autumnal mode. And I should also note that in all of this, where you are, the place that you live may very much not have markers like this, because your seasonality, your environment may be entirely different. So, for example, Temperance Alden has written a book that talks about kind of the witch's year and the cycle of the year that you have, and she very much kind of writes from the perspective saying, look, some of the places I've lived, we don't have this division of seasons where you really get a fall, right? You don't really get an autumn season. It kind of just goes from summer to kind of a version of winter where I am, and then kind of shifts back into kind of pre-summer, which might be spring, and then really is summer. And that's kind of that experience. If your seasonal cycles don't line up with these particular spokes on the wheel, right? That's fine. One of the things I very much advocate in my book and in the podcast that we've talked about, things like that, I very much advocate looking to your actual area, your region, and seeing what festivities already exist on your calendar cycle, and working with those, because those are going to be more valuable to you because you have a community around you. And so that idea of gathering together with other people is actually a really big part of a lot of this festival, the festival season, the experience of festivity. it's really, really important that you actually are getting together with other people. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every festival has to be about you know, going out and hanging out with a huge group of people or in a crowd or anything like that. Sometimes they're very small, intimate gatherings. But the idea is that you have a community that you belong to, and participating in the festival is a way for multiple members of that community to come together and celebrate in some way. That's part of what makes it sanctified and holy. Is in your everyday experience, you might not see some of these people, but it was nice to take a break out of the holiday cycle to spend some time in recreation and leisure with these people that are a part of your life that you may not see as regularly as you want to, right? And there are also periods of time where you're actually intending to create some kind of effect, right? So a lot of these festivals are all about celebrating what's good in life, getting rid of what's bad in life, adding blessings, or putting some kind of a block or barrier up against harm coming to you. So we see a lot of that kind of happening too. And it's really, really important to understand that these functions, these things that are going on inside of festivals, these things that are going on inside of celebrations like this, are what make them special, or what set them aside and make them valuable. And so to kind of illustrate some of these points, I wanted to take you through just a handful of other harvest festivals that happen around this time of year, or even festivals that may not be ostensibly explicitly harvest festivals, but that happen in this time period. So we can kind of look at what are some of the hallmarks, what are some of the features of these, and see, is there something that appeals to you, or something that clicks with you, that fits your cultural situation better, something that you can use more effectively. So some of the big ones that kind of happen around here, one of the biggest ones, there's the Mid-Autumn Festival, which you find in a lot of, for example, Chinese and Chinese American communities. Sometimes also called Moon Festival, where the idea is that you actually make these little cakes called moon cakes that are delicious. There's these little kind of round moon-shaped cakes. And you consume those. There are celebrations and blessings that go along with this. It's actually kind of the second most sort of celebrated holiday on that lunar-linked calendar that you have in a lot of Chinese and Southeast Asian cultures. So there's a lot of sort of, reveling in Thanksgiving, and, you're getting together with your family. You're usually having some kind of a meal or a feast. You're celebrating all the things that you've had good in life, and you're asking for continued blessings in the year to come. That's really, really common. And then some other ones that you might either know or maybe not know would be, for example, Sukkot. Sukkot is one of the Jewish holidays. It's considered, I think it's called either the Festival of Booths or the Festival of Tents, depending on kind of who you talk to. And the idea was that you would have these temporary tent-like structures that they're not camping tents, but they're kind of like little those kind of like little kiosk-style booths, right? And so they would have these celebrations. There's some specific rules about how you actually make these tents. They have to be, I think, open on one side. They're supposed to be covered with a natural material on the top of them. And you eat meals with people, usually family, and oftentimes family that gather together from, if not far away, that are not necessarily eating together all the time. So it could be multiple generations of family that will come together and eat in these tents or booths in a sort of outdoor environment, right? And it's a sort of celebration. It's a Thanksgiving. It's a gratitude for the blessings that you have both through food and through family, and it's a really beautiful way to kind of celebrate those things. You've also got festivals like Crying the Neck, or that's more of an activity that happens, but it's part of this kind of celebratory season that you find in kind of the British Isles. That one usually involves everybody kind of trying to get their harvests done first, because it was kind of thought it's bad luck if you're the last one to harvest your grain, particularly. If you were the last farmer to harvest, then all of a sudden you're the one who's kind of the slow one, right? So you wind up being sort of seen as the bad luck farmer, right? But they would do this kind of fun thing where they would make a sort of, they would save out one planting of wheat or whatever grain they're harvesting, and they would kind of bundle it up so it almost looks like like a person. It's not quite Wicker Man or anything like that, but it's sort of got a vaguely humanoid shape. And then what they would do is everybody would take turns hucking scythes and knives and things like that, harvesting implements at this thing, trying to knock it down. But they're all doing it kind of together, collectively, to distribute any bad luck, so it's not affecting any one person severely, and in fact might actually become good luck for everybody else. Just kind of depending on how it all shakes out. You've also got, for example, Dozynki, which is a Slavic, really Polish is kind of what we're thinking here. This is one that I've actually seen more people posting about it lately, which I think is really lovely. And it's got this whole thing where people will make a wreath out of the grain and then have a processional parade. So again, a big community coming together. There's grain involved, so there's going to be some food and celebration there. There's religion. Oftentimes the wreaths are blessed by the local priest as well, and then it brought into a home or hung up on a particular building or in a particular place in order to provide additional blessings and additional benefits through the coming year, right? So that's another kind of big one that we have around this time of year. There's a whole bunch of Catholic festivals that kind of happen in here. Catholicism, if nothing else, definitely likes you to have, as much as they want you to be austere and well behaved and godly in whatever way they can manage. They also recognize that you need time to blow off steam, and so they build in a lot of holidays for that in the calendar. So, for example, some of the things we have, there's Assumption Day, which happens back in August, I think. So it's a little before all of this, and that has to do with sort of Mary blessing your life, blessing your home, but it can also be other things too, such as harvests and food and things like that. And then we have one of the holidays that I really like to celebrate, which is Michaelmas, which happens on September 29th. It's a celebration of the feast day of St. Michael and all archangels. I do some kind of slightly heretical versions of celebrating that involve kind of working with Michael, but also with other spirits with whom Michael has a relationship, even if it is a contentious one. It is a holiday that has to do with sort of like celebrating these sort of angelic figures, but also asking for protection. Michael is an angel of protection, so you're asking for that. Again, usually there's a preparation of food that goes into that. There's, again, foods, things like blackberries are thought to be, they need to be harvested by Michaelmas, because if you try to harvest them after that, then the devil has cursed them either by spitting on them or urinating on them or something like that. So there's some customs that get associated with that. Not too long after Michaelmas, I believe it is in early October. I think it's October 4th or 5th. They have the feast day of St. Francis, and that's the blessing of the animals. And so people will have their animals, pets, livestock, anything like that. They can be blessed by the priest as part of that celebration. So again, if you're in an agricultural society, you're blessing your livestock because that's part of your livelihood, right? So there's a prosperity and protection aspect of that as well. So lots of those. It's one that that has been largely commercialized, I think, in the 20th and 21st centuries, but has some really fun roots, is Oktoberfest, which is a German, Bavarian holiday we associated with beer, but it wasn't just beer. It was because the beer was a part of the harvest process, because people turned some of these harvests into beer. So beer was a part of it. But then, you're also celebrating by eating, and you're gathering together with friends and really community. Your whole community will come together, to sort of celebrate these kind of communal events and feasts and things like that. Here in where I am right now, I'm in Pennsylvania, German country. They have the Oktoberfest definitely shows up, but you would also have something called Harvest Home, which was kind of a Thanksgiving celebration. It was actually a rival for Thanksgiving in North America for quite a while. It wasn't until really the late 19th century that Thanksgiving was able to edge out Harvest Home as a celebration. But the customs are the same. They're very similar. It's a big feast, get together with your family, oftentimes family that you haven't seen in a while. You would maybe play some games. You would have food and share the table with everybody. And there was also, oftentimes you would try to distribute food to your less fortunate neighbors and things like that. So spreading blessing around. So that happens there. We still have things like fall festivals. Those are still going on. A lot of schools will do fall festivals, which are opportunities for the community to come together, play games. You're celebrating children and sort of there's no overt magical qualities to that. Although I would say, coming and having parents, all do things with their kids in kind of the school space. Oftentimes they're done kind of by schools or by local communities. There's a sort of like, let's bless the children and let them carry this blessing into the future. I think that definitely does happen. It's just perhaps it's a little more subdued because it's connected with things like school events and things like that. So there's a lot of these different festivals that we have throughout the year that are all about celebrating this harvest season, the blessings that we have either received already and that we want to continue through the coming year, or blessings that we would like to share with other people. You're not limited to just doing Mabon celebrations. You have a lot of flexibility. And it's really, really, one of the things I think would really be good to emphasize is that it's not necessarily that you have to celebrate it on one specific day. A lot of these different festivals float around a little bit on the calendar. They're going to be based on when the harvest is actually done. They're going to be based on kind of lunar positions that change over time. Some of them are fixed. So, for example, a lot of the saints' days are more fixed in the calendar. They weren't always fixed in the same way. And even Michaelmas has had some adaptations, because it used to just be St. Michael's feast day, but now it is St. Michael and all archangels as a feast day. So there's a flexibility to this. You don't have to necessarily pick just the equinox to celebrate. If that's what you do celebrate, that's lovely. There's nothing wrong with that. And there is some real power and wonder to seeing the sort of exact balance of night and day at a specific moment in time, right? But even knowing that, there's so many festivals that kind of fall around that date, many of which you might be able to participate in if you just kind of look around in your community and see what's going on. Because I can almost guarantee you someone in your community has an autumnal festival that they are celebrating that you could potentially be part of, which is kind of wonderful. I also wanted to, before I leave off with this, which, this is just kind of my take on some of these autumnal festivals. So I wanted to leave this with some of the things that I do as a part of my seasonal celebrations at this time of year. These are things that either I do regularly or that I've done in the past, and I like to do, periodically as a part of this kind of time of the year. So I'm going to show you kind of two things that fit into my practice. And again, I generally am kind of celebrating Michaelmas, which very much has to do with things like creating barriers of protection around you, but also sharing blessings that frequently are associated with things like bread. So there's going to be kind of two things I want to show you today. The first is doing wards. And the way that I do wards at this time of year, I oftentimes am just going to make a series of little paper slips that I then fold up and I will tuck into things like door frames or under doormats or under the threshold, this threshold plating on my house. Sometimes I'll tuck them in window enjambments and things like that too. And sometimes I'll just kind of hang them up in those spaces. I've even done things like I used to live in a house where I had a pendant light that hung over the front door entrance. And so I found a little spot where it wasn't going to be touching the bulb or anything like that. I didn't want to start a fire. That's not the way you celebrate protection and harvests, is by starting a fire in your home. So, but what I would do is I'd take the slip and I'd fold it up and I'd kind of tuck it into this light so everybody had to pass under it. And so that's one thing I like to do, is do these kind of different physical slips of paper that just kind of get tucked in there. And, usually I'll kind of make the piece of paper, I'll say a little blessing on them, either give them a kiss or give them a little, to, activate them. And then I'll tuck them into their little home for the next year. So, do I clean out the ones that already exist there? If I can find them again, I sure do. And I, ritually dispose of those at a later date. I will say, a lot of times I don't. A lot of times they just kind of have disappeared over the course of the year, which I take to mean that they were doing their job. They did a good job. They caught something, blocked something, did what they did. They could also have just fallen down in the wall. They could have fallen somewhere that I can't see them. That's fine too. Like I said, if I find them, I'll get rid of them. If I don't, then I don't. One of the best known of these is what's called the Seder Square, and I've made this version of it, which is kind of a massive version of the Seder Square, I probably wouldn't do a piece of paper this big, although this one, I may take this one, fold it up, and put it in some space around my home, just because it's kind of big and bold, and there's some value to that. Seder Squares, we find them going back several centuries. We see them in a number of different grimoire style writings and things like that. We also find them distributed among a number of folk magicians, ranging from the British Isles and Europe to North America. So these are a very, very common one. They're effective because the idea is that you have this square of words, and I don't know if you can tell. So Seder arepo tenet opera rotus. But if you read them, you can read them multiple ways, right? So you can see Seder is right there, but it's also right there, right? Rotus right there, but also right there. Tenet kind of crosses itself in the center, right? And so they have these kind of intersecting, it's almost an acrostic puzzle. And I think there's a lot of theories as to why people use this particular one. Some people say it's derived from what's called the Paternoster, which is the Our Father prayer. I mean, you can kind of see that in the specific letters that are chosen. But one of the things I really think that I would say this works because is because it kind of creates a mental labyrinth. So there's a lot of traditions in folk magic where you sprinkle seeds at the threshold, or salt, or something with grains, so that any negative power that wants to cross into your space has to count all of them, right? There's this sort of task that you're giving it, and because of that, it's not going to enter your home because it doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to do that work. Well, this basically creates a puzzle, and it's an unsolvable puzzle. For something where it's basically, once it starts reading it, it has to figure its way out of this in sort of a visual, textual, mental labyrinth. And so if something's coming into your home, it's going to get stuck trying to figure out how to read this, because it all reads forwards and backwards in all these different ways. And so it sort of creates a mental labyrinth that traps whatever it is that's trying to get into your home. That's my take on it. That's not necessarily what everybody would say. I do think that there's multiple ways that you could look at this and it might be effective. But it's a very straightforward way of doing that. It literally is just writing down this square, this magic square, and putting it somewhere in your home. And you can do more to it than that. Sometimes I like to anoint the corners with oil, or I'll whisper over a prayer over it or something like that before I put it in. But don't go incredibly elaborate with this. It's really the charm itself that does the work. But it's a good way to set up what are called wards, which are these sort of gate points or checkpoints around your home, to keep harmful things from getting in, right? So keeping any kind of curses or hexes that might be coming your way, it sort of catches those and stops them, right? So that's one thing. That's a good protective method that I thought I would share today. The other thing that I do is a house blessing. And this is a house blessing that I learned growing up as it was a Polish house blessing, is what I was told. I've certainly encountered it outside of Polish contexts. I've seen it Jewish contexts very, very clearly. I definitely have seen Jewish practitioners who do something very similar to this. A lot of Central European practitioners of a variety of traditions, including things like Catholicism and paganism, have versions of this blessing that I'm going to show you. It's a very straightforward blessing. It does not involve very much. It's basically you're creating a little jar that you're going to give to somebody to create a standing blessing in their home. So it just requires that you have a few things. So you're going to have a little piece of bread, you're going to have some salt, and you're going to have a coin. And then I oftentimes like to include just a little prayer scroll that will have either a psalm or something like that on it. You could do any kind of a blessing. It could even just be something saying like, with this gift I bless, and then the name of the person that you intend to bless. And then the other thing that you have is a little empty jar. And so all you're going to do for this is you're going to take the empty jar and you're going to add these ingredients, right? And you'll say, bread so that you may never know hunger, a penny that you may never know poverty, and then salt so that your life will never lack flavor. And you add all those things together. And then you might also include the prayer scroll as well. Oftentimes I'll kind of fold that up and put that in here. I have not done that here, so it's a little awkward, but that's okay. So you tuck it all in there, you seal it up. It's ideal to put quite a bit of salt in there, just because what that will do is that'll dry out the bread and keep it from ever becoming moldy. It'll make the bread stale, it'll dry out, but it'll preserve it. It'll sort of mummify the bread for you so that this doesn't become a health hazard or anything like that. And then you give it to the person, and they tuck it away in their pantry. They tuck it away in some hidden corner of their house, preferably somewhere near their kitchen. And the whole point of it is that it sits there, and they will always have bread in their house. They will always have a coin in their house so that they won't be poor, and so that they always have a seasoning in their house that will make sure that their life is interesting and stays interesting, and that they won't necessarily lack for what we would call sort of flavor in their life, right? It's very straightforward, very simple blessing. And you can do more to it if you want to. You can certainly say some prayers over it. You can, give it to them and pray over it with them. That's a lovely thing to do. I always think it's a really good idea to explain what it is and just say it's just a little house blessing that I like to give out. And if you explain it and kind of take them through what's in it, it does not harm the magic at all. And most of the time people are pretty charmed by it. They think it's really sweet that you're doing it. They understand it's sort of a symbolic gesture. And if they choose to throw it away, then they choose to throw it away. That's on them. But it's really lovely to do that for people around this time of year, especially if they've just moved into a new home, or if they've got any kind of new living arrangements that they're dealing with. But whatever they're doing, this is a really good time of year to say, oh, I just want to add a blessing to your home and sort of share that blessing around. It's a very simple way to do it, very, very efficient. I oftentimes will make that one of the few gifts that I consistently give to most people when they move into a new home, just because it's easy, very, very simple to do, but it adds that layer of sort of magical blessing and protection over the family and the household without necessarily having to be incredibly detailed, or you having to go through every room of their house and sort of set up wards for them or anything like that. This just adds a kind of a baseline blessing to the household, which I think is lovely. I think it's a very, very in line with this time of year. So I hope this was valuable, informative, interesting to some of you out there. I'm sure some of you have some autumn festivals that I've totally missed here, or you may know more about some of these festivals than I do. I would love to hear more from you about the festivals that you do celebrate and how you celebrate them. So please feel free to leave comments below, talk about what it is that you do to celebrate this time of year, because I'm always interested. I always think it's really, really fascinating to see what people do to celebrate these kind of festivals, and how you bring magic into that. What are the sort of magical things that you associate with this time of year too. So thank you, as always, for watching. I really appreciate it. Till next time, be well.